Hello, and welcome back to our podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing the Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid mechanization, innovation, and urbanization. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on the people was great. Urbanization and development meant that the lives of people that had previously lived on farms, working subsistence lifestyles for generations, were rapidly changing, as people were moving to cities and began to work in factories. But industrialization affected more than just people. New industries developed, transportation and communication totally improved, and political relations were transformed. Globalization changed how states interacted, and states like Germany were now attempting to rapidly improve. Ideas like new imperialism developed due to these new changes, and nations had to figure out how to respond to all of this. Today, my partner, Clara Hawkins, and myself are going to break down the major events of the Second Industrial Revolution and outline their impact on the world. If you're interested, stick around.
At the time of the Second Industrial Revolution, a wide array of advancements were seen within the steel, chemical, and electricity industries, which in turn led to new possibilities in production. One major factor in this was mass production. This process provided a new way for production to be fueled, and thanks to this, household goods were now mass-produced, making them more accessible to common folk. With mass production, replaceable parts gained prominence, allowing people to easily be able to replace broken aspects of weaponry. Continuing these advancements within the steel industry. As steel production gained prominence, it led to the invention of automobiles and airplanes, which in turn aided in making transportation quicker and more accessible. On top of this, steel was rapidly replacing iron when building things due to it being cheaper, more accessible, and ultimately stronger. These factors allowed railroads to be produced for a competitive price, in turn benefiting transportation and the economy. The next major way in which advancements led to new production possibilities was within electricity. Several years after the discovery of electricity, Edison and Swan made a highly effective light bulb. This resulted in buildings being able to be artificially lit, which in turn extended the workday from the hours of daylight. Further, advancements in the chemical industry greatly opened up production opportunities. At the time, and still to this day, Germany was one of the major centers for chemical production, and during the Second Industrial Revolution, Sir John Laws discovered the possibilities to use chemicals as crop fertilizers. This resulted in an increased agriculture production, which helped sustain a growing population. And with this, labor-intensive agriculture jobs were not in high demand, and many moved to cities to take on jobs in factories. These advancements continued, and Germany quickly came to dominate the world in the production of synthetic dyes. By 1913, they produced almost 90% of the world's supply. This broadened what types of goods could be produced and fueled the production of luxury goods. Continuing on the trend of innovation, an English man known as Alexander Parkes invented and patented a plastic known as Parkesine. This was made of celluloid based on nitrocellulose treated with many solvents, and expanded what types of goods could be produced thanks to this new packaging material. Finally, the mass production industry was widened as soaps and vegetable oils were also able to be mass-produced due to William and James Lever's adaptation of a chemical process using glycerin and vegetable oils.
Although humans had been slowly improving technology over time, as seen through the multiple innovations made to shipbuilding, with the development of junks and caravels and many other iterations of ship designs throughout human history, it wasn't until the Second Industrial Revolution technology experienced a period of massive advancement. Some of the biggest of these advancements occurred in transportation and communication technology. Railroads and steamboats incorporated ideas of motorized transportation and are examples of improvement in transportation technology. Railroads were hugely important as they allowed for many more goods to be transported and required a lot of materials to build, which stimulated the economy. As you can see, looking at the chart detailing British iron production from the period 1740 to 1900, the amount of iron produced by England during this time increased exponentially, as iron was needed to build railroads, and the railroads allowed goods to be moved easier, increasing the market for iron. Similarly, steamboats, another form of transportation, advanced during this period, allowed for more cargo to be moved further distances than ever before, at a speed faster than horses. Grand Canal systems optimized steamboats, and ports served as major points of good exchange. A rudimentary treatise on the steam engine by Dionysius Loder, published in 1848, explains the details of the steam engine in a more easily digestible way, shows the popularity of the steamboats, to the point where even the general public had an interest in understanding how steamboats functioned. The telegraph and underwater telegraph were examples of improvement in communication technology, and this better communication technology, in combination with improvements in transportation technology, made the entire U.S. more interconnected, as seen on the maps of the railroads of the East Coast. In combination, these two technologies had a huge effect on trade, migration, and global interactions. For one, more goods could be moved faster, which stimulated trade and expanded the scope of what trade was viable beyond local communities. Cheaper transportation prices, increases in industrialization, and a greater awareness of other states also helped create a period of mass migration, with Europeans and Asians traveling to America. Large urban centers, in particular, attracted immigrants as they offered job opportunities in factories. As the connection between countries became stronger and true globalization was slowly achieved, global relations began to change. Now states were more aware of what was happening in other states, and what happened in one country could influence another, as seen by the impact of the American Revolution had on France. Because of this, global politics became a much bigger deal, and states began forming alliances and monitoring other states they deemed as threats.
Germany industrialized much later than Great Britain due to the country not being politically stable enough to devote time and funding to the industrialization process. But once this process started, they industrialized very quickly because they were now a unified and stable nation, the government greatly supported industrialization, and they were highly focused on education. As Germany began to industrialize, it caused many people to migrate. At the time, Germany had good living standards, high wages, and a large population, all of which made it attractive to immigrants. In Germany's industrialization process, many advancements in agriculture were seen as well. They were now able to use machinery for most labor and could produce more food to sustain the ever-increasing population. One of the major ways that industry was promoted within Germany was through the government, now that Germany was a unified nation. The government encouraged railroads and transportation to be built, and the Zollverein in 1813 made Germany a common market country. They also encouraged the production of a railroad system, which in turn helped natural resources and products be moved, although this process was quite different to that of Britain's. As previously mentioned, Germany's industrialization process started much later than Britain, and that played a key factor in how they industrialized, and quick and effective processes were necessary to catch up. Much of industrialization in Germany was centered around educating the masses, which Britain greatly lacked, and the government contributed much more to promoting industrialization in Germany. Both countries took advantage of prevalent rivers and canals, but Germany suffered a major disadvantage where their rivers only flowed north, giving them less options for transport. This resulted in Germany being a lot more reliant on railroads comparatively.
In the 19th century, many states began focusing on nationalism and achieving sovereignty. Some states were breaking up, with revolutions occurring in many states, and France and Britain continuing a period of ongoing conflict. In the late 1800s, this began to change, as powerful states started to expand their empires. The effects of this were seen in Africa, which had been previously made up of a number of independent states, fact that quickly changed as it became rapidly colonized and split between different European powers. Similar to the God, gold, and glory that had motivated previous voyages, European states continued to rapidly expand, with the goal of spreading Christianity and gaining resources. However, more now than ever, these actions were motivated by a racist view of the world and a belief in white supremacy caused by the popularization of social Darwinism. This period also saw the development of a form of new imperialism. As the term implies, new imperialism was a combination of new factors, like technology, ideas, and beliefs, used to describe the unprecedented growth of many Western European powers, the US, Russia, and Japan, to overseas territories. These new colonies were often modeled after past empires. For example, Britain's model of indirect rule in Africa was similar to their model used in India. Technology and industrialization were two of the biggest contributing factors to this growth. Despite trying, Europeans had proved unable to conquer many tropical states previously. Disease and the long distance played a part in this, but the fact that these were defined cultures with some form of low-tech weaponry that gave them the abilities to adequately defend themselves also contributed to this failure. But technology solved many of these issues. Medication makes disease less of a problem. Better communication made ruling a large empire easier than ever. And guns and other weaponry technology greatly reduced the ability of these peoples to fight back. Sentiment reflected by Hilaire Belloc, who stated, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they do not." Industrialization and capitalism meant the creation of factories, which created a need for raw materials. Imperialists were capitalists, and they took advantage of less developed countries like Africa, Southeast Asia, Korea, and some of Latin America, who did not have factories, but had raw materials. This trapped certain countries into a period of underdevelopment, and reliance on larger states as their economies relied on exporting goods. In this way, industrialization led to the expansion of empires in the 19th century, this time in a form of economic imperialism motivated by racism, a demand for raw resources, and national pride, deliberating the future of many countries along the way.
As the Western world industrialized in the 19th century, Japan and China both quickly fell behind in the industrialization process and were forced to give way to their influence to an extent. Both countries desired to be quite independent and blocked off much foreign trade, but the levels of this varied. In China, merchants had limited rights and they could only come in through Port Canton and deal with certain groups of traders, as you can see in the commercial map of China. Japan was more strict and they only traded with the Dutch through Port Dejima. Soon, Europe tired of these restrictions, and after much pressure from the West, the Opium Wars in China were sparked. This ultimately resulted in China being defeated in the Opium Wars and Europe forcing more open trade throughout the country. Although, Japan somewhat escaped these pressures as they had much more comprehensive understanding of how Europe operated and the threats they would have to face. Instead of going to war, they opted to negotiate with Europe. Both of these events, in China and Japan, resulted in much more open trade with Europe, but China came out a lot worse. Another factor to consider in the country's responses to European pressures was the time frame. Japan wasn't forced to open up their ports to Europe until 10 years after the Chinese, since Europe was too preoccupied with China. Also, Japan got to see firsthand what would happen if they did not submit to European wishes. These factors resulted in Japan being able to successfully modernize and become an industrialized nation. This helped make them a world power as they learned from Europe. Leaders adapted and the government encouraged change. China tried to do the same, but this was to little avail. Leaders were set on keeping ancient practices, and at the time they were lacking the motivation to modernize. As we discussed the major events from the Second Industrial Revolution, including major advancements in steel, chemical, and electricity industries, progress in the world's transportation and communications, and the global impact surrounding it, the delayed industrial process of Germany, industrialization's role in imperialism, and Japan and China's reaction to Western industrial powers, we gain a much deeper understanding of industrialization's role far past the economy. This allows us to better comprehend what each country was facing at this time period in relation to the rest of the world as well. Thanks for listening.